All right, I'm going to work a couple problems off of your midterm exam review quiz that is in my labs. Make sure you go through this review and understand how to work each problem, and keep in mind that this midterm exam does weigh heavily with your average. So first, we have the basics like an equation. 3 times 5x plus 2 plus 19x equals 55 minus x. So very first thing we're going to do is distributive property. We're going to distribute the 3, and that's going to give us 15x plus 6 plus 19x equals 55 minus x. Next, we're going to combine like terms. 15x plus 19x will give us 34x. Bring down the plus 6 equals 55 minus x. So now I'm going to switch sides, and when you put your x's together, make sure you know that the signs change. So when I bring that negative x over, it becomes a plus x. Equals, bring down my 55, and I'm going to take my 6 over, and it's going to become a negative 6. So we have 35x equals 55 minus 6, which is 49. Then we're going to divide both sides by 35. And that will reduce by 7, and you would have 7 over 5 as your answer. Please make sure that you do reduce all of your fractions, okay? So that's just a basic one, basic equation, distributive property, combining like terms. Second one I will work is like number 2, which is 1/4 times 5x plus 2 in parentheses minus 1/5 times x plus 3 equals 2. And it is a linear equation as well, but this one has fractions. So I would clear out the fractions. It's easier to work with without the fractions. So you look at your denominators, 4 and 5, and the least common denominator, which will be the number that they both go into, would be 20. So I would multiply each term by 20, okay? When you multiply your terms by 20, on the first 2 terms, it's going to be the fraction on the outside. So you're multiplying 20 by the top number, and you still need to divide by what's on the bottom. And that's going to reduce to a whole number. So that would give me 5, and then I bring down my parentheses, minus 20 over 5 will give me 4, and I bring down that second parenthesis. But this is just going to be straight multiplication, which that would give me 40. 20 times 2. So now I have a basic equation without the fractions, and I'm going to do my distributive property. And that's going to give us 25x plus 10 minus 4x minus 12 equals 40. And then I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to say 25x minus 4x will give us 21x. And then 10 minus 12 is a negative 2 equals 40. And then I'm going to get 21x by itself by moving the negative 2 over. And when I switch sides, it becomes a positive 2. And so that's going to give me 21x equals 42. And you're going to divide 42 by 21. And so x just equals positive 2. So I wanted to show clearing out those fractions by multiplying by the least common denominator. Okay. You will have inequalities on your midterm. If you look at number 4, and it could be that some of these problems are slightly different per student due to the fact that they might be shuffled with a generator. So it might not be the exact same problem, but they will be very similar. Okay, so this is an inequality, and they want you to solve it and then pick the correct graph and notation set. So you work it just like an equation. Okay, I'm going to set it up, work it just like an equation, meaning I'm going to do distributive property with these parentheses. And so that would give us 10K plus 20 minus 2K plus 18 is greater than 6K plus 12 plus K minus 3. And then I'm going to clean it up. So we got 10K minus 2K will give us 8K. And then our whole numbers, we have 20 plus 18 will give us 38. Is greater than, clean up this side. We have 6K plus 1K gives us 7K. And then we have 12 minus 3, which gives us 9. And then just like with those equations, we're going to get our variable on the same side. So when I bring this 7K over, it becomes a negative 7K. And I bring down my 9. And when I bring 38 over, it is now a negative 38. So we have K, 8 minus 7 is just 1, is greater than 9 minus 38 is a negative 29. So that's the inequality solved. And so if you're looking for the correct graph, negative 29 will be in between your negative 30 and negative 28. And it says greater, so your shade should be pointing towards the right of negative 29. And you should have an open parenthesis towards the shade. So that would be the correct graph, and the correct solution set would also mimic, it would look just like your graph, meaning you're starting at negative 29 and going to positive infinity. Make sure you have it enclosed with parentheses. Okay? Next, we get into graphing the coordinate system. So you'll have, like on number 7 here, it asks you to find your intercepts, X and Y intercept, and they want you to write your answer as an ordered pair. So when you're looking for intercepts, when I'm looking for X, I have to let Y equal 0. You gotta replace one of the variables with 0 because you only can solve an equation with one variable in it. So if I let my Y be 0, technically the Y is gone. Okay, that's what that means. So you just have 6x equals 24. And when you divide both sides by 6, we get x equals 4. So that means that this particular linear equation, this line is crossing the x-axis at 4. So you would write that as an ordered pair where the x number is 4 and the y number is 0. Okay, that's the ordered pair for the x-intercept. Then when we turn around and find the y-intercept, we're going to do just the reverse. We're going to this time let x be 0. So when you let x be 0, again, and I wrote the wrong number in front, that just means that that particular variable is gone. So that doesn't exist. So we got negative 8y equals 24. We divide both sides by negative 8. That way we have y equals negative 3. So if the y equals negative 3, that would give us the point of 0, negative 3. And those will be your intercepts. X-intercept is 4, 0. Y-intercept is 0, negative 3. You have some graphing. Do a couple graphs. Let's look at x plus 4 equals 6. And they're asking you to graph that linear equation. Well, I hope that you notice it's a special linear equation because you are missing a variable. You don't have y. You only have the x coordinate. So if you solve for x, which means you would subtract your 4, that would give us x equals 2. So let me open and pull up a graph. All right. So if we're going to graph x equals 2, then I'm going to go to the x-axis at positive 2. And when I put my point at 2 on the x-axis, it's always easy for me to graph the special lines because they tell you what you're supposed to do. You don't have a y, meaning you don't have a y-intercept. So this line will never cross the y-axis. So the only way I can go through this point without crossing the y-axis is to go vertically. I have to go up and down, which is a vertical line. It is an x-only line. So it has no business crossing the y-axis. That's what I tell my students in my traditional class. If it doesn't have a certain variable, that means that intercept is not there. It's never going to cross it. So this is a vertical line at 2. Okay? I don't know if this question will be on test, but you need to know that the slope of all vertical lines, they're undefined. Okay? You need to know that the slope of an x-only line is undefined, okay? Meaning that it doesn't exist, okay? So you might have to give that slope, but I do know you're going to do some graphing. You will also be asked to graph an equation similar to this one. Let's do y equals negative 1. Y equals negative 1. So here, this is just the reverse column. You're missing the x. So your special linear lines is where you're missing x or you're missing y. That's going to be vertical versus horizontal. Now this one just has the y coordinate. So let me pull up a graph. So here I have my graph. And it says y equals negative 1. So if this is where y is at negative 1, that's that point. Then just like when I did the x coordinate, the x line, this is a y-only line, meaning that the only way I can go through that point at negative 1 is I cannot cross the x-axis. It does not have an x-intercept. So the only way I can go through that point without touching x is to go parallel to x, which means it's got to go only through the y-axis. It will only touch the y-axis because it only has the y variable. It does not have an x. So that's your horizontal line, okay? You need to know, probably for the exam, that the slope of all horizontal lines is 0, okay? 0. Please make sure you understand that 0 and undefined are not the same thing in graphing. So you got to be clear. If you're asked what's the slope of a horizontal line, you must say 0. Not none, not undefined. You got to make sure you're clear with saying it is 0. And then obviously with the vertical, like we mentioned previous, it would be undefined, okay? So those two are your special lines. You could also be asked to do the slope formula. And I think that's going to probably match number 11 on your review. So the formula, and you are going to be given your formulas. You can pull up that formula sheet when you take your midterm. But the formula for finding the slope is merely subtracting your y's over your x's. Now you can do the first coordinate before the second, or you can do the second coordinate before the first. They both produce the same slope. So I'm big in my classroom on using the first one because we read from left to right. But it does not matter. You're going to just make sure those y's are on top and your x's are on the bottom. So you have on top your y's, -6, minus a -15. Keep in mind there was a minus sign already in the formula. So those two negatives will make a plus. That's really the biggest mistake I see with the slope formula, is students want to replace a negative for that minus when they become an actual plus sign. And then on the bottom, you will have your x's, which would be -5 minus a -14. So you have that same thing again, which will also make that a plus. Two negatives make that positive 14. So I just rewrote what you really have so you can see your signage. But you would say -6 plus 15, which will give us a +9. And then -5 plus 14 would also give us a +9. And so 9 over 9, we all know is just 1. So make sure you do reduce all of your fractions, and that just gives us a 1. Find the slope of a line if it's given to you in standard form. If we have 3x plus 5y equals 24, you can solve it for slope-intercept. You can solve it for y, meaning get y by itself by subtracting the 3x. Bring down the 24. And then you would just divide everything by 5. And so y equals -3 over 5x plus 24 over 5. But the question just asks you for the slope. So we know when it's in slope-intercept form, the number on x would be our slope. So that would be a -3/5. You also can use the slope formula for standard form. And I don't know if this was given in the videos, but we do minus a over b when we're in standard form. And keep in mind, standard form is ax plus by equals c. So when I say -a over b, I'm talking about the number that's on x would be considered your a, and the number that's on y would be considered your b. And you would just say minus the number that's on x, which would be 3, over the number that's on y, which is b, and that's 5. And you see you get the exact same number, which means that's the slope, as you would if you were to put it in slope-intercept form. So either way, it will work. This formula you can use when you're in standard form to find that slope. You're probably going to be asked to tell if two lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. And I really would use that formula if I had to, because it's just quicker. You could be given two equations, such as 6x plus 2y equals 8, and 15x plus 5y equals 24. So I personally would use that m equals minus a over b, because the whole deal with parallel and perpendicular lines is their slopes. So that's all I need. I don't need to graph it. I don't need to know the y-intercept. I just need to know what the slopes are. So on this one, that is 6x plus 2y equals 8. If I'm looking for just that slope, keep in mind that's the standard form, ax plus by equals c. So that would just be a -6 over 2 which will give me -3. So that's the slope of that particular line. And then I would take that 15x plus 5y equals 24. And I would do that slope formula here as well. And so again, that would be minus, and that would be 15 over 5. And we know -15 divided by 5 is a -3. So here we got the same slope. Both lines have the exact same slope of -3, which means they are parallel, okay? Parallel lines have the same slope. Now, this question, I don't know if it will be the exact same on your midterm, but perpendicular lines have an opposite reciprocal, meaning they're going to be opposite signs. One of the equations would have to be negative, the other equation would have to be positive. One equation would be the reciprocal of the other. So let's just say, what if the first equation, we come up with that slope as -3. If I'm looking at perpendicular, and I'm just adding this as a side note because you just never know. I want to make sure I cover all basics. Now I'm letting you know these are parallel. But what if, and I'm going to switch my screens. Maybe that would be easier to understand because I don't want to confuse nobody. But this is a what if. And I'm asking about perpendicular lines. Okay? Let's say one slope is -2/5. The perpendicular slope would have to be the opposite of the signage, which if he's negative, I would need a positive. Okay? And if it's 2/5, reciprocal means flip it. I would need a slope that says 5/2. Okay? That's what you look for when you're dealing with perpendicular. The signs are going to be different. Obviously, it won't say plus, but I want to make sure you notice one's positive and one is negative. And then you have 2/5 versus 5/2. That would be considered perpendicular, okay? So keep that in mind when you're doing your review, when you take your test, that you are looking for the opposite sign and the reciprocal. However, when you're doing parallel, they got to be the exact same, okay? You might be asked to graph a line using slope-intercept form, such as y equals -1/7x minus 4. So, okay, I pulled up a graph. And if we're going to use slope-intercept form, and this is really one of the favorite ways for graphing for me, because all you need is a starting point and you need the slope. So our starting point would be -4. That is considered the y-intercept when we're in slope-intercept form. And let me write that form up here. That's y equals mx plus b. Okay, it's kind of the famous form for graphing. So that b represents that y-intercept. And then obviously that m, we know -1/7 would be our slope. Okay, that's our movement. So you're going to put your very first point on -4. And I'm going to do my graph in red so you can really see my line. But that's where this line is going to cross the y-axis. Y-axis is at -4. And then my slope is a -1/7. So I always tell students, keep in mind, slope is your rise over run. So you can do it one of two ways. I always try to keep students from being so confused with graphing. I take care of the negative by going down. I don't rise a negative number. I fall back. But I still run right, okay? RR, run it right. Because if you're going to go down, that's one negative movement. I cannot go left and go down at the same time. Left and down are both negative movements. So I only can do one. If you go up, that's positive. then I must go left to make it negative. So I always tell students I like to take care of the whole negative by just going down. Take it with the top. Do it with your top movement so you won't be confused. So I'm going to show my steps in yellow. I'm going to go down one line, and I'm going to run right 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that next point would be here. And see, with you using the graphing tool on the computer, it will go ahead and make this line with those 2 points. And my line is a little crooked. But it will get those 2 points connected perfectly with that graphing tool. But I want to make sure you know you plot that y-intercept first. That will be at -4. And then you're going to go down one line due to the fact that it is negative. And we're going to run it to the right 7. And that will bring you to your next point. We've talked about vertical lines. It asks you to graph a line that's going through a point and that slope is undefined. That would mean that you would be going up and down. Vertical is undefined. Let's write the equation of a line. Let me show you an example of writing that equation. It says write the equation of a line in slope-intercept form that is passing through the point 4, 2 and has a slope of 9. Now, I might slightly do this different than the video. We use in the traditional classes slope-intercept form to solve for our missing number. We're missing the y-intercept. So we just take a given point, which would represent your x and your y. You have m. The only thing I'm missing is b. So I'm going to plug those 3 numbers in and find my b. And then it's kind of like puzzle pieces. Then I'm going to plug it back in to actually write the equation of a line. So if we were to like fill in the blanks, your given y coordinate is 2. The m is 9. And the x coordinate is 4. So that would be 2 equals 9 times 4 will give us 36 plus b. And if you want to get b by itself, we're going to move 36 over by subtracting it. So b would equal negative 34. So the y-intercept is negative 34. So it's kind of like now I got to put it together. My m is 9 and my b is negative 34. And keep in mind, this is what slope-intercept form looks like. You must fill it in with the correct m and b. So my equation would be just y equals 9x, because 9 is my m, minus 34, because that's the b that I just found. And that's using slope-intercept form, okay? Keep in mind, if they ask you to write the equation of a line that's going through a point and is perpendicular to a line, that means you got to get the slope of that line, meaning that that slope is going to be the opposite reciprocal. And then you're going to plug in. They do have one on here for parallel. Let me work that one just, to give you an example of what I'm saying. Write the equation of a line that's going through the point -2, -5, and is perpendicular to x plus 4y equals 16. So what I was saying here is that you have a given point that's on the line, but I want it to intersect. I need it to cross this line. So the only thing I need from this line is the slope. So I'm going to do minus a over b to get that slope, which that's in standard form. So you do know this is the formage for ax plus by equals c. So that would be minus 1, because that's the understood one for A, over 4, which is B. So the slope of this line is negative 1/4. I am not asking you to use the parallel. I'm not saying do the same. I'm saying do perpendicular. So the perpendicular slope would be a positive, and if you flip 1 over 4, you technically have 4 over 1, which is the same thing as just saying 4. Okay? So that's the M that we're using. And we're going to use this point to find my B. So I don't use point slope form, and they use that on my labs. We use y equals mx plus b, like I did on the previous problem. So that y coordinate is negative 5. The m that we have to use is the perpendicular one, which is 4. And the x is negative 2. And so we got negative 5 equals, that's a negative 8 when you multiply it together. So to get b by itself, you're going to add 8. And so we get our y-intercept to be positive 3. Okay, that y-intercept is going to be positive 3. So the equation, keep in mind, if you want to write that equation in slope-intercept form, you now got to plug in the m that was perpendicular, which would be the 4, and the b that you just found. So that would be y equals 4x plus 3. That would be the correct equation in slope-intercept form, okay? So keep in mind, and I'm not going to work the other one, but if I took that same equation, okay, this is another problem that could be on your test, and I said, let's go through this point, but it's parallel to that exact same equation. Keep in mind, parallel, that's my symbol for parallel. That would mean the same slope. So if we know the slope of that line is negative 1/4, then you would use the negative 1/4 in your y equals mx plus b to find b. So kind of keep that in mind what parallel means. Parallel means I'm using the exact same slope, versus perpendicular means I must use the opposite, and then it's got to be flipped. Okay, opposite reciprocal. All right, next let's look at something like your exponent rules on 21. You got negative 2x to the 4th times negative 6x to the 5th. So when you multiply, you're going to multiply the coefficient numbers, negative 2 times negative 6, which will give you a positive 12. And the rules for your exponents is when you're in multiplication, you're going to add your exponents. So that's going to give us x to the 9th, okay? If you are doing your power rule, such as the one on 22, negative 2x squared y to the 4th, and then I'm raising it to the 5th. This is power to power. The understood power that's on negative 2 is a 1. So make sure, it's kind of like doing distributive property. Make sure you multiply those exponents together. So that would give negative 2 to the 5th power, x to the 10th, and y to the 20th. So you're going to evaluate your coefficient number, and that's going to give you a negative 32. 2 to the 5th, negative 2 to the 5th is negative 32, x to the 10th, y to the 20th, okay? Let's see. Negative exponents, make sure you know you move the negative exponents. If it's negative on the top, it goes to the bottom. If it's negative on the bottom, it goes to the top. Then we get into our polynomials. such as like 27, where you have 8x to the third times 8x squared minus 9x plus 7. And when you multiply this 8x to the third on the inside, you're going to multiply the coefficient numbers together, but you're going to also make sure you know that rule is you're adding your exponents. So 8 times 8 is obviously 64. And then 3 plus 2 makes 5. So that'd be x to the 5th. Minus 8 times negative, 8 times negative 9 is a negative 72. And that would be x to the 4th. And then 8 times 7 is a positive 56. And that would be x to the 3rd. So just wanted to remind you of those rules. And then we got our multiplication of two binomials together. Let's do like an example of that. Like on 30, 4x plus 3 squared means that you have the exact same parenthesis twice. And you're going to take 4x and multiply it times the second. And you're going to take 3 and multiply it times what's in the second. So 4x times 4x would give me 16x squared. 4x times 3 is going to give us 12x. Then we're going to say 3 times 4x, which is going to give us 12x. And 3 times 3 will give us positive 9. And then we're going to combine 12x plus 12x, which will give us 24x. And I bring down my 16x squared and my plus 9. Just reminding you of stuff like that. Then we get down to our factoring, reminding you of grouping, reminding you of GCF, and then the trinomials. So if you were to do factoring with GCF, let's look at something like 33. Negative 4p to the third plus 18p squared plus 14p. All three terms have a common factor of negative 2p. Pull it off, divide it off. And we always kind of pull off a negative when the very first term is negative, because you want that first term. Normally, sometimes it's that squared term. You want it to be positive. So you're going to divide by the number and subtract the variables. So that's going to leave us with 2p squared. Then negative 2 into positive 18 gives us a negative 9. P squared minus p is just p. And then negative 2 goes into 14. That's a negative 7. And the p's cancel. So you're left with negative 2p on the outside. And then you have 2p squared minus 9p minus 7. Okay? And all they want you to do here is do that one by GCF. So that's as far as we would need to go. If we look at 35 on the review, it's asking you to do grouping. And grouping, we got 10x to the third minus 45x squared plus 2x minus 9. So grouping, you want your terms to kind of be sitting next to each other, that they would have something in common that you can pull off. So this one I would probably rearrange, and I would put my 10x to the third plus 2x together. And then I would put my negative 45x squared minus 9 together. So off of the first two terms, the GCF I see here would be 2 and an x. And when I pull that off, that would leave us with 5x squared plus 1. And then on my second two, they're both negative. So I would pull off a negative 9. And what would be left over would be positive x squared plus 1. So what you have here is kind of like GCF still. You got this group versus this group, and they both have the parenthesis of 5x squared plus 1. So if you take that away from both groups, that's going to be part of your answer, and what's on the outside would go in the parentheses as part of your answer as well. So those two parentheses together would give you 5x squared plus 1 times 2x minus 9 would be your answer for grouping. Then you have your trinomials. Basic 36. We have x squared minus 4x minus 32. And so here we are looking at that last sign, says we are subtracting to get the number in the middle. So we're going to do our two parentheses. We have x's in the front. Then we're going to look at the factors of 32. And those factors are 1 and 32, 2 and 16, 4 and 8, and so I'm looking for a factor pair that is going to subtract and give me 4. So we're going to use 4 and 8. That would go in the back of my parentheses. And then I always tell my students we're going to do outside, inside. So that gives me multiplication now. X times 8 is 8x. 4 times x is 4x. And you see, if you were to subtract those numbers, you would get 4x. But make sure the signs are correct. My 4x in the problem is negative. So in order for me to get a negative, I must have a negative 8. So make sure you have the negative sign on 8 and the plus sign on 4 to make that be negative 4x in the middle. So your two binomials that you would multiply together would be x plus 4 times x minus 8. Or you can write it x minus 8 and x plus 4. Doesn't matter which parentheses you write first. What matters is which one has the negative and which number has the positive. Okay? So that's kind of what we consider a basic trinomial. And then lastly, 38 has a trinomial that has a coefficient greater than 1. If you had 3x squared plus 14x plus 15, I always ask my students that when you have numbers, coefficients on all three terms, check to make sure you don't have a GCF. Because you need to pull that off first before you even factor. So this one doesn't have a GCF. So the last sign tells us that we are adding to get 14. So I'm going to do my two parentheses. In the front, I don't have any options. The only factors of 3 are 3 and 1. So you're going to have a 3x and a 1x. Now with 15, your options are 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. I would hope that you know we're not going to use 1 and 15 because that's too big. You're trying to add and get 14. 15 is already bigger than 14. So that's like common. So we're going to do 3 and 5. And I also tell my students, remember, you cannot put the same numbers in the same parentheses. So 3 could not sit in the same parenthesis with 3 because that's going to break a GCF rule. So there's really only one way you can put 3 and 5. 5 would have to be in the parenthesis with 3x, and 3 needs to be in the parenthesis with x. But you're going to check your outside, inside. 3x times 3 makes 9x. 5 times x makes 5x. And 9 and 5 will add up to 14. Remember your signs. 14 is positive. So if I'm adding, I must have the same sign. So both of them are positive. You must have a positive 9 and a positive 5 to make a positive 14. And those two parentheses would be my answer. So I've quickly tried to go through this review and just pick certain problems out of the 38. Keep in mind they could be different from the ones that you see. because it is a generator, so it kind of changes problems per person. But hopefully this will kind of help you. I do know exams started today. A few of you have probably already taken that exam, but I tried to get something out there at least by today to help for those that are trying to wait till later and don't understand some concepts, that maybe this will help you.